shock you if I told you that I don't think a single person has actually uncovered the real problem with the live-action Snow White. I feel like everyone is just rehashing things we already know, like the live-action movies being sold as cash grabs. Or that they have terrible CGI that sucks the life out of the animated characters. Or that instead of investigating interesting things that the original movies may not have had time for, they introduce these stupid, pointless B-plots or try to respond to the bad faith Disney princess girl boss criticism of the 2010s. And to make matters worse, if you're actually interested in a deeper discussion, you will instead be bombarded with hundreds of grifters churning out videos on the daily with their commentary over COD footage crying that Disney has gone woke. Does anyone have something new to say that actually means something to them? Well, I do, and it is something that goes beyond ugly hairstyling or awful acting. It is about how Disney, in their attempts to fix the princesses of the past, are actually sending a harmful message to young girls. The same harmful message that they are claiming they are trying to stay away from, and it is at its worst with Snow White. But what is it? Why is Snow White different from the other live-action movies? And why does it matter so much? This is Calxiyn Cares Too Much, here to make you care. And thank you to all the patrons and the YouTube members who allow me to make videos that matter. So what is my big problem with Snow White that I don't feel like anyone else is talking about? And my answer may surprise you, but to get there, let's go over the type of things that I don't like. We have seen Disney try to update the princesses, but instead of feeling like they are polishing and refreshing the characters' already existent traits, Disney ends up ruining their own original messages. The best example of this is how in the animated Mulan, Mulan is not a good soldier right away, but she thinks outside of the box and uses her wit, intelligence, and determination to train and succeed. The live-action Mulan tries to empower her by giving her magical powers, which undermines the stronger message to young girls, that we can succeed using our own strengths instead of needing to conform. I guess now to be better, or at least on the same level as men, we just need to be born with natural talent and perfection. Jasmine never got an I Want song in the original Aladdin, and the live-action movie would have been a great opportunity to give her an intimate, vulnerable one. Instead, they wrote Speechless, which is supposed to be this empowering, show-stopping number, and she gets to sing it in the void. Unlike a character like Elphaba, who actually has power in singing out to all of Oz and defying gravity, Jasmine says, "I won't be silenced," but she literally is. Even this idea could have been an interesting allegory if she started out as being ignored, but singing actually changed that, but this song literally does not matter, and it was designed in a lab to be played on the radio. I could go on, but all of the live-action movies have these moments where clearly they're patting themselves on the back for these decisions. Oh, they're so progressive. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here thinking this is so fucking stupid. But that being said, I don't think that the new script treatment for the Snow White live-action movie is inherently bad. I think the idea of Snow White being the people's princess is actually very interesting and aligns with the idea of vice and virtue, of good and evil that the animated film did. It actually elevates the thematic question that the musical is asking, reinforcing that what makes Snow White fair, beautiful, is her heart. People who are against reimagining fairy tales do not actually understand them. Fairy tales are a reflection of the deepest desires and strongest fears of the society they were told in. It is within their very nature to be retold. This is why we have hundreds of versions of Cinderella or Little Red Riding Hood, all with different morals across different cultures, and even amongst different classes in the same culture. Anyone who gets precious like, "Oh, well, they changed this, that makes it bad," clearly does not understand the historical and cultural importance of retelling fairy tales. My problem is not actually with the retooling of the script here. Rather, it is how they have decided to integrate these changes with Snow White's original character. Or not. This is what I have an issue with, and while they're patting themselves on the back for going forwards, I actually find from my perspective as a performer that they are taking a huge step back. Let me explain. I got a comment recently asking me if there was a shortage of soprano vocalists in musical theater, and the answer to this is a little more complicated than you may think. First, let's make sure we're all on the same page. So, soprano is a voice type, and what this comment was referring to was not if sopranos, the voice type, were going extinct, but rather it was in the context of modern belting versus a more classical style of singing. So to clarify, you can be a soprano and belt. When we're talking about, oh, sopranos are going extinct, we are talking about classically trained or operatic sounding sopranos, which I am, for example. But how is all of this connected to the new live-action Snow White? The singing style debate is related to what I am going to reveal as Snow White's actual biggest problem. And it's not just in this movie, it's in the entire theater industry right now. And let me make something crystal clear. If you have been foaming at the mouth waiting for me to trash Rachel Zegler, I am not going to do that. In fact, I think that having that level of vitriol for people you don't even know is just as parasocial as being infatuated with them. And what people are so desperate to ignore is that this would have happened no matter who played her, because this is about the direction of the movie and the songs that the directors demand to be written. It has nothing to do with her performance, which I think is technically good in the snippet of the new song that they released. And it's so easy to say, oh, well, if it wasn't for so-and-so actress, the Disney that I used to love will come back. But that is a distraction. Now, to talk about that song as a professional musical theater performer and songwriter, I hate Pasek and Paul. I think that they're hacks. I don't know if Rachel Zegler can make anything sound flawless, or this may be one of their, very rare bangers. In a shocking turn of events, I actually kind of like it. This would have been a great song for something like Wish, but I don't like it with Snow White, and I don't like what this type of song represents on a deeper level. The issue of how to musically depict the traditional princesses was strategically avoided for Maleficent and Cinderella because they are not full musicals. But now with Snow White, they had to face it head on, and I hate what they chose. Even though us performers are more impacted by this, I feel like it still trickles down to everyone in one way or another. And even though I am strongly against things like, oh, Ariel taught us it's okay to change yourself to be with a man and all of that bullshit, these people don't even have the media literacy or media analysis skills to understand what the Disney movies are actually about in the first place. Even though I will fight for Disney and Barbie like that, the issue is never one particular character. It's that if hundreds of characters are pushed into the same little box, it creates a cycle, subconsciously or consciously, of this is how things should be, which is why representation is so important and why stories with all types of different characters and lessons should be told. So all of that said, why do I think that Disney is actually regressing with what they have done with the new music? Typically, you can argue that for new musicals, because they are in a contemporary setting, a contemporary vocal style makes the most sense. You wouldn't have a character like Aurora in Dear Evan Hansen. But historical and fairy tale musicals are different. They can still live in that classical operatic place. So explain to me why. We have a fairy tale character who is still living in that fantasy historical setting, Snow White, who on top of all of that was originally very operatic, ending up with a new musical number that sounds like it was written for Sutton Foster. But if you are not a performer, you may not understand why I find this so egregious. Just last week, I saw a comment criticizing a currently running Broadway show. I expected her, the performer, to get angry, but instead of belting, she just kept getting more and more operatic. Now, it would be one thing if this comment was phrased separately, like they had one criticism of the acting, and then they also said, I wish she had belted here, here's why. But instead, this comment suggests that belting is necessary to express anger. And it's not just this one comment. This is a mentality that prevails from the audience side and the teaching one. Disclaimer that nowadays, most teachers advise you not to tap into your real trauma to perform, but some still do. And so anyway, I still remember being told to do that, basically. And I had been tapping into some intense, real fury where I was literally shaking during a monologue. I was acting authentically true to a real emotional response I had had. For example, think of this like the teacher saying, recall the last time where you had an argument where you were wronged, where there was some injustice, and channel those emotions, like speak the monologue like you had spoken to that person in that moment. And after I was finished and thought that I had had some sort of breakthrough, I was told that my voice was too high for the monologue to be believable, and that people don't sound like that when they're angry. And that ultimately, that sort of performance would not be taken seriously. And that wasn't even while I was singing, so it wasn't a matter of belting or not belting. It was just my voice. And you can imagine that for songs, it wasn't much better. I have a whole list of songs I wasn't allowed to sing for that same reason. You cannot play that character, it will not sound right. This is not just isolated to theater. I'm sure that some of you have stories like that as well, and if you're comfortable, I encourage you to share them in the comments. There's all these ways that we are demanded that we change to be taken seriously. And do the majority of us who have high-pitched voices sound like Snow White? Of course not, but this mentality was everywhere as I was training, and it was also in the media I consumed. It is not about mimicking that exact voice from the animated movie. It is about what changing it entirely represents. Belting is associated with strength and power. Being a classical singer is not. It is no coincidence to me that classical operatic singing is associated with ingenue archetypes, and that ingenues tend to be perceived as weak because they have a different type of strength and femininity. They are soft, they are naive, they are gentle, and most importantly, they are vulnerable. And before people jump on me and interpret this entire video like that one Tumblr post that's basically like, let men be masculine, I'm not saying let women be feminine, I'm saying why can't Snow White be a revolutionary and a classical singer? Am I just supposed to pretend that there's no correlation between these things and that they didn't look at Snow White and decide, hey, if she has to be a revolutionary now, she can't sound like that anymore? And in the other snippets that were released that showcase Rachel Zegler singing the songs that were in the animated movie, she does have those classical singing traits. So what's even more egregious is that the people in charge were like, well, Snow White can be operatic when she's singing about cleaning, but when she's singing about saving her people, we gotta cut that shit out. That is the message that you send when you keep the old songs from the animated movie, but then write new ones that aren't even in the same vein theatrically or vocally. You are saying that the character's strength and independence can only be earned or found by abandoning their original musical and vocal signatures in favor of a contemporary, pop-leaning style with mass appeal and those big belty moments that are perceived as strong. If you want to write a strong female character or make a character who's a hero instead of a damsel in distress, I guess don't make them one of those weak, pathetic soprano types. No one will believe they're actually angry. No one will think that they can fight a grave injustice. If we gave Snow White her original voice, it would be silly. We must take what makes this character unique and change her so we can force her into a box she doesn't belong in. Am I supposed to be empowered by that? They want to have their cake and eat it too. They want all the marketing potential of using the original Snow White iconography, but they want the credit for reinventing the story and making something that is more modern. But this results in something that appeals to no one because it drives away the people who would have preferred something entirely new and the people who loved the original story. And as much as people love to think, oh, it's just a kid's movie, it's not that deep, I was a kid once too, and these things did impact me as I grew up. What these creative teams don't realize is that for people like me, the princesses are one of the only saving graces that we have. Because of the same archetypes being recycled over and over again for the people who sing the way I do, I got put into a box very early on, and this box didn't always have the characters that I wanted to play inside of it. I was told time and time again that no one would believe me if I played a character with complexity or with a wide range of negative emotions because of my voice. Then when it came to the rare surviving soprano roles like Glinda's higher register is used when she is putting on a fake public persona. This is something that was written in intentionally and that the creative team pats themselves on the back for even now. When she uses her normal voice, she's being honest. When she uses her operatic voice, she's lying. Classical soprano voices are not even perceived as sincere anymore. So as classical sopranos for genuine leading lady roles become less and less popular, even in period shows, this left me with child, perpetual child at 25 years old, quirky best friend, or stupid, vapid, popular girl sidekicks. Imagine constantly being told, presented as genuine advice when people see you, when they hear you sing, that's what they'll think of. That's what you're good at, playing annoying children, shallow posh socialites, or socially awkward nerds and dumb blondes. You'd be perfect as Christine though, but they don't write Christines anymore. And all the while, I looked at characters like Elsa and Elphaba and wondered why it couldn't be me. Death by 1,000 Cuts or characters ended up resulting in me speaking in a fake lower voice, even outside of theater, just so I would be taken seriously while speaking at work or in class. And it's not like I even did this consciously, I only realized it when someone in my life I had reconnected with gently asked if that's why I was doing it. It wasn't just this desperation to be a belter. At that point, this had escalated to changing how I dressed to be tougher and acting like an asshole. And some of you may think, oh, so you had a phase. A lot of people do. But it wasn't just a phase. I knew the entire time it wasn't true to who I was. But given how these belter characters in the leading lady archetype tend to be, they are jaded, they are sarcastic, they are snarky, they are cold, they are always ready to fight someone, and powerful while doing it, that's what I wanted. That's what I thought would make me strong and respected. The older Disney princesses, despite not necessarily singing about going on adventures, gave me something else to be. Their vulnerability meant that their stories were actually taken seriously. It's not, oh, she sings classical to hammer home that this posh, materialistic woman is after this man for his money, or going back to Glinda, singing higher is a facade. It's a lie. The princesses have this genuine elegance, grace, gentleness, kindness, playfulness, and hopefulness expressed with emotional sincerity. Theater is considered one of the last bastions for sincerity, but now these songwriters are looking at these characters and they're being like, well, to make sure that everyone knows that we wrote a strong female character, they need to belt. And it's not just about belting, it's belting in a more complex, higher way than all of those other shows on Broadway right now, with no concern for the actors that have to perform that complicated piece 8 times a week for no reason other than style over substance. But at least as I got older, I was told when people see you, they'll think that you can be a princess. And that is what I have been training my entire life for, to get that role of the princess. So my problem with Disney is that they actually had the opportunity to challenge what is currently the status quo for leading ladies. They could have had Snow White fight for her people while retaining a voice similar to the one she had in the animated movie. As I said, does it have to be exactly the same? No, but they didn't even try. They want to reinvent Snow White for this generation, but will also tell this generation in the same breath that to be perceived as strong, you must conform. Girls like the old Snow White are weak. Girls like this Snow White are strong. To be a revolutionary, to be a hero, this character must abandon their natural voice for another. I've never gotten to play the hero, and I probably never will. I said in a video once, I want to play a princess who gets to be the hero, who has a grand adventure song. And people suggested songs like My Grand Plan from Lightning Thief, and though that song is good, it is a belting song. People also suggested things like Just Around the River Bend from Pocahontas, which it will never be appropriate for me to play, but also, even in a vacuum, her song trails off sadly. It doesn't have that same heroic triumph that Hercules or Quasimodo have. Most of the Disney princess songs end sadly, and even though they may be thematically appropriate, like I get why, say, Rapunzel or Ariel have their more victorious reprises later, it doesn't change the difference in how I Want songs are written for sopranos compared to belter characters or male characters. Speaking of male characters, did you guys know that Hercules was supposed to have a different I Want song before Go the Distance? But Alan Menken actually was sat down and told that the song was too effeminate and that the song was making Hercules land too softly. And that's how we got Go the Distance, with the hunting horns and this triumphant going into battle, something is calling me type sound. The reason why I bring that up is because I cannot stress enough that this is not a let women be feminine type moment, but that we need to talk about how a certain type of femininity and vulnerability is very clearly seen as a weakness across the board. And this is wrong. Musical theater relies on vulnerability. Musical theater is built on a character bearing their heart and their soul to you through song. And what's wrong with the modern Disney men is that they refuse to be sincere, and now that is bleeding into the modern Disney women in their I Want songs. As I said, theater is one of the last places where I know I can find sincerity. And that's not to say that characters who are belters or whatever inherently have these insincere songs. That's not what I'm saying either. What I am saying is that it is not sincere when you write a song for a character that does not reflect their heart and their soul. When you force the character into a mold, not because it benefits the story, but because it benefits public perception. Snow White needs to be stronger. Hercules needs to be stronger. We need to give them muscularity. There's one last thing I want to bring up here, and I am not the person to speak on this as an authority. I am not trying to be one. I am not one. The reason why I want to talk about this, though, is to start a dialogue for you guys to share your own perspectives. So maybe I'm out of my depth here, but I would like to use my platform to at least mention it. There's a performer on TikTok I really like named Brianna Colleen, and she has a series called Musical Theater Songs You Don't Usually Hear Black Girls Sing. I feel like there's something to say about how women of color, specifically Black and Latina women in theater, have an uphill battle when it comes to this issue. As much as this video is me complaining about being typecast in a way that was, quite frankly, a little traumatizing to, my growth as an individual person and developing my personality, it would be wrong for me not to acknowledge that I still have options to book work even if I hate being cast as a 25-year-old minor. If I want to, because I can belt now, I can try to change my hair or my clothes or how my face looks to the audience with makeup, and I might get away with a character like Lydia or Eurydice, even if I'll never be an Elsa because I'm too short and round and cute. But a lot of sopranos are ruled out for roles based off of their race and harmful stereotypes associated with that race. There are people who have been told that they cannot play roles like Joanna or Cosette, not because race is integral to the story, but because the creative teams do not perceive them as being able to land in that softer, more vulnerable way. For example, a lot of roles written for Black women to play are belters. But those roles also intersect with the harmful stereotypes of the sassy Black friend character. And I watched a whole video about this recently, about it in animation, but it also applies to theater as well. This is the character who is independent and confident and aggressive all the time and strong. And usually the song only exists in order to impart some lesson onto the white leading lady about how they should fight back against something. When it comes to stereotypes, we also see something similar with the fiery Latina stereotype. And again, same situation. In theater, there's a lot of sassy belter roles there. So when we get back to the casting of the live-action Snow White, in a similar way to Ariel, I do think that this will make a lot of children feel seen. I understand how important it is for people, and personally, I strongly believe in colorblind casting. But isn't it also kind of shitty that it's like musical theater is the last bastion for sincerity and vulnerability, but not for you? You need to be a strong, independent woman who doesn't need a man. Doesn't it suck that Rachel Zegler does not get to be Snow White, that they will only let her and cast her in the girl boss, strong, independent woman version of Snow White? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. It's not my call to make. I just know that if I'm tired of being perceived as weak all the time, there must also be performers out there who are tired of having to be strong all the time. And that have something that they want to share with the world that they aren't getting the opportunity to. This is why for my VTuber project, I am determined to make a princess who is classical and operatic, but also gets to fight the monster. I want to prove that these things are not incompatible with each other. Opera, which is where the singing style comes from, conveys a variety of emotions. Anger, despair, heartbreak, happiness, sadness. For both the men and the women. I want to dispel this idea that classical singing is only useful for if you're falling in love or singing sadly to the birds. But I shouldn't have to do that. Not when Disney has all the money and all the power in the world, and they would lose nothing by supporting the traditional musical theater elements that made them Disney. And usually I'd be able to say, well, at least the animation department is still giving us good musicals. But they're not. I certainly don't expect to see a traditional soprano type anytime soon after Rapunzel, Anna, Elsa, Moana, Maribel, Asha. I can't even expect a good song anymore, never mind the bravery to break from the adorkable girl copy and paste personality type. If you want to hear more about the downfall of the Disney movie musical and how production is influencing the quality of the songs we are getting, I'd highly recommend checking that video out. But otherwise, this has been Calxiyn caring way too much, and I hope you care too. I will see you next time. Bye!